everybody. It's good to see you all again. It's a real pleasure to be here. I just finished a winter course, which is 4 weeks long. So I taught students for 4 weeks. It's an insanely short period of time in which to get a lot of stuff done, and it was a real whirlwind. So I feel like I haven't recorded videos in a long time, but actually I have recorded a ton of lecture videos. I looked at the backlog of videos I had recorded, and there are probably like 10 of them in between the time I've recorded my last video for this channel and today's video, but they're all lecture videos. They're not witchy. So hello again. I hope to be far more regular, especially now that I am not teaching for a bit. I won't be teaching in the spring, so I hope to be much more regular in my uploads now, perhaps like twice a week or so, because I will have a fellowship, but I won't have near as much demanding work every single day, emailing and all of that. So yeah, it's good to be back. And today I'm just relaxing and trying to enjoy recording a video. So I have this chocolate kiss, which is something I get from a local cafe called Espresso 77. If you're in Jackson Heights, I'm sure you know them. If you're not, they're a freaking delicious cafe. And the chocolate kiss is like one of their signature things that is just chef's kiss delicious. It's got chocolate, espresso, steamed milk, everything that's good, basically. So yeah, just trying to see this video as an opportunity to kind of chill out and just talk about some stuff that I really enjoy. And today what I want to talk about specifically is ancestor veneration, and more specifically, Mallorie Vaudoise's book, Honoring Your Ancestors. So just a little background about me. I've been doing ancestor veneration for a long time. It's one of the first practices that I really clicked with, and it's one of the first practices that I ever did that could have been construed as really in line with what we mean when we say witchcraft. I was even contributing to, I used to go to a college that had a Dia de los Muertos altar, and I worked for the department that had the altar, and I would contribute to it yearly. I would put, pictures of my own ancestors on it. And so that was my first exposure to ancestor veneration. But then, it was years later when I got into witchcraft. I've only gotten into witchcraft in the last, maybe 2 years, which was much after I went to university. But anyway, yeah, I've always connected with it. I've always done Samhain altars. This year my Samhain altar was a little bit like, I don't know, less impressive than it usually is. It was basically just some ancestor pictures added to my normal altar. Usually I go a little bit more above and beyond than that, but this year I was tired, so I didn't. I hope my ancestors appreciate it anyway. But because of this book, I've gotten much more into ancestor veneration, not just at Samhain, but all year long. So I've begun praying to ancestors and asking them to, particularly to help me appreciate having a body, to help me appreciate being a living person in the world, and having, the agency that comes with having a physical body. So I've been asking for that gratitude every day, and just asking them to bless my efforts. And yeah, it's been really rewarding. I've actually been reciting their names and trying to remember all of their names, and they're getting to be second nature to me. Because I also do ancestry, like genealogy work, and I consider that part of my ancestor practice. It's the part that I don't feel awkward talking to my family members about, but I do consider it part of my ancestor veneration for sure. Because I've learned names through that. I've learned so many names that I didn't know before. I've learned about so many people and their experiences. where they lived, the kinds of things that they were interested in and that they did in their free time. And yeah, I am lucky to have been able to do that, and I hope to be able to continue doing it in the future. But yeah, so the prayer has been one of the main things that I learned from Mallorie Vaudoise's book, and I want to talk about that a little bit. So this is the book, Honoring Your Ancestors, and just a couple brief, it's a very short book, but there's so much packed into this, like you wouldn't even believe how much information is packed in here. It's one of the hands down best witchcraft books I have ever read, and I really have read quite a few at this point, so I think it's really, really good, and I loved a couple just general things I liked about it. I liked that at the end of every single chapter she has journaling prompts. So she has quite a few. You can see there's like 5 of them there. So she has a lot of really practical things for you to really get into this. It's not just reading about the theory, and that's really good for a person like me. I'm an academic, and for anybody else who is, or for anybody else who, honestly, I feel like a lot of witches sort of tend this way, tend to be very research oriented, and we really like reading books. We like having all the books and being able to say we've read them all. And sometimes that can get into this place where you're just like storing up knowledge and you're not really doing anything with it. So I really like that she has a ton of journal prompts, and that she gives a lot of, she also gives like one activity to make what she's saying really concrete at the end of every chapter. And I do feel like a lot of witchcraft books have that format. I don't think this is like completely unique. But I really just liked the activities that she had and the journal prompts. They felt all very applicable and often very doable. And they really showed effectively like how ancestor practice does not have to be hard, and it should be like connected to your life. So just some more specific stuff. I have some notes I'm going to be looking at. Just some more specific stuff I wanted to say about this book. So she has, there's actually quite a few chapters. I believe there's 9 or 10. I'm just going to like hit some of the high points that I really loved. One of the things I love that she says in the introduction, which I saw as kind of like explaining to you why you would want to venerate ancestors. Because for some people, this isn't that obvious. Some people may not be interested really. But she kind of explains why. I saw that as like the sort of work of the introduction. She makes a big claim. She makes a really big claim, which is that a lack of ancestor veneration is unhealthy and unique in our society. That it's a mark of how far we've gotten away from, I guess, our roots, and the types of societies that we come from. She talks about how this lack of ancestor veneration in the modern world at large, even though there are obviously like some cultures that still venerate ancestors like to a high degree. I think she's talking mostly about, I guess, the Western world. And she talks about and societies that value like this individual paradigm above all else. And she says that this is related to and perhaps responsible for things such as racism, misogyny, ecological crisis. And while I think that that's like a big claim, I also think that it's really interesting, and I think she really explains kind of what she's getting at there. When I think what she's getting at is that it's a kind of disease to not remember where you come from. It's a kind of disease to not have any connection to the past whatsoever, to not have any connection to the people who literally brought you into the world through their own bodies. And I think in addition to figuring out how we're connected to historical forces and history, also like figuring out figuring out where things about ourselves that are different might have come from. So one example is that I recently just figured out that I had a lot of Catholic ancestors who lived in Louisiana, and that their original name was Mayo, and they anglicized it to make it into Myers. So that was very interesting for me because I had no idea that I had any Catholic ancestors, and so I had no connection to the Christianity in my family because it was all very divorced from any sense of mystery. It was very much about dogma, more about belief than practice, and certainly more about belief than it is about ritual. And so I've always admired, like, I'm not Catholic, and I really, like I said, I had believed that I had no connection to Catholicism until very recently. But yeah, I found out that that I had Catholic ancestors, and since then I've been thinking about the ways in which I would walk into Catholic churches. I took a European sort of like vacation with my husband. It's like, to this day, it's like our biggest vacation that we've taken. And we went to like a couple different countries. It was like this very big thing. And in each country, we would visit Catholic churches. We went to France, in particular in France and Italy, we visited a couple different Catholic churches. And in every one I would walk into, I would feel this sense of like power and mystery, and just the silence was so beautiful to hear. And I felt like I could actually, in a lot of them, like not Notre Dame, obviously. Like when we went into Notre Dame, it was so busy I couldn't have prayed. Couldn't have actually sat down and prayed there. But in a lot of the churches, I felt that I could actually have sat down and prayed at a time in my life where I didn't feel connected in the least to prayer. So, yeah, all that to say, I've always felt this connection, but never really understood it. And now I'm reevaluating that and wondering if perhaps part of that is because I am connected in that way. And likewise to a few saints, I've always felt a little connected, in particular to Saint Martha. Even from when I was a little kid, I remember reading the story of Martha and Mary, and Jesus being in their home, and thinking that like Martha was right. Like Martha's doing all the dishes and Mary's like sitting at Jesus's feet. And then Jesus scolds Martha for scolding Mary for not helping her. And I was always just sort of on Martha's side, like, who's gonna do the dishes, man? Like, somebody's gotta do them. So anyway, all this to say that ancestry work has really helped me reconnect to some sense of what being, it's helped me to salvage parts of Christianity for myself, and also in the future, I want to look further back too. I want to think like what was like maybe in who are my ancestors like in the Renaissance or the Middle Ages, or who are my ancestors way back. And Mallorie Vaudoise talks a lot about some of these things. So another thing that I really liked that she said, this is in chapter 1, where she talks about different kinds of ancestors. And this is also something that I really liked because she talks about saints as a kind of ancestor, which I never really knew how to categorize them before, so that was very helpful for me. She also talks about the ways in which like plants could be thought of as our ancestors, and really gets you to think about like evolution, and how everything on Earth is in a sense connected. Even if we didn't directly evolve from something, we have all evolved together, and we've all organisms have been here, have evolved together. And she also talks about spiritual guides, because she mentions this. She's coming from a background of Espiritismo, and she was also raised Catholic, so she is not like dogmatically Catholic. She doesn't like follow everything as far as I understand, but she does kind of like obviously use saints, work with saints, and through Espiritismo, I think she draws on that to work with spirit guides. So she talks about the concept of the spirit court, which though I haven't studied Espiritismo, I believe that's a concept from that tradition. And she talks about how there's certain spirits who want to work with you specifically beyond just like what's in your family background. So yeah, or it could be associated with your family background or could not. It seems like it's like a very personal kind of thing as far as I understand what she's saying. Yeah, and she talks about house spirits and land spirits as well, and how house spirits could be thought of as like a subset of land spirits. I think that's a really useful concept for me. And I think she's getting into some like ideas of animism, which I appreciated. Sometimes it can be really hard for me to connect to more like Wicca influenced books or books that are very much like about like spellcraft as this sort of thing that you do that might be kind of divorced from your life. But it seems like she's thinking about it more as something that it's your connection. Witchcraft is your connection to the land. It's your connection to your home and your home space within the land. And again, thinking about how you're situated with more than just yourself, how you're situated in a space that is, again, shaped by like forces that are outside of you. So she also talks about trauma. In chapter 2, she talks about ancestral trauma and how to she gives a ritual for elevating your ancestors. So I really want to try that. I think it sounds really great. Chapter 3, she talks about altars. And something I loved about this is she has this quote. She says, purely mental magic tends to produce purely mental results. And I loved that. I thought that was just great. Because it's so true, and it expresses why you need to put part of your spell into something material, why you should be working with materials or physical things. And this is just my perspective, but if I do magic that's just all intention and all about visualizing, again, this is also because I struggle with OCD, but I'm not very good at visualizing. I always worry that I'm like doing it wrong or something. And I'm sure I could work on that, and I probably should work on that, but for me, it really is helpful to have a lot of material components to my spell to know that I'm doing something and being able to see that I'm doing something. So that's her sort of reason for using altars. And she gives a lot of great practical tips. She talks about making oil lamps, which I had never heard of before. Let's see, what else did I want to mention? She talks about things to put on your altar, and she goes beyond just the 4 elements. She talks about cloth, which, if anybody knows me, they know I love textiles. I studied needlework for my dissertation, so when she was talking about cloth, I totally get what she means, because I have been really lucky to inherit a couple of Afghans from crocheted Afghans that we believe my great-grandma made. And I knew my great-grandma. Again, I was very lucky. I knew her for a few years. She was pretty old when she finally passed. But anyway, yeah, I was really lucky to get these. They're amazing. One is like orange and green and really beautiful, and the other one is like pink and blue and gray. And that one I like because, again, it looks so bi, even though it's not trying to. Obviously, my great-grandma didn't have that on her brain when she was making it. But I've always seen these as such a gift that I'm able to have, and that they were passed down this far. You know, my grandma had them in her house, but she never knew how to crochet or knit, so we knew that she hadn't made them. So we've always just assumed that my great-grandma made them. But yeah, anyway, so she talks about cloth as connected to your female ancestors and something that you can therefore like put on your altar that will really help you connect to them. And she also talks about cloth as a visible sign of an ancient mystery, which I love that. I love that idea that cloth is a mystery. Because if you think about mystery in the way that she means it, it's like, if anybody's ever done textile like crafting, it sort of induces a trance. It's one of the things that that can sort of make you go into this like trance-like meditative state. And just thinking about our ancestors, our women ancestors, and this is something that I think unites like most cultures, like women made some sort of fabric or cloth. Just thinking about them making that and like going into a little semi-trance and having all these thoughts, even though, you know, maybe they weren't able to write them, or maybe they weren't able to pursue the careers they wanted or whatever. For me, it always seems like a moment of real freedom for them, or like it could have been a moment of real freedom. It could also be obviously like a lot of drudgery, so I'm not like romanticizing having to make all your clothes. But yeah, I think it could also be like a moment of like mental freedom in a way, by doing this like repetitive physical activity. Then in the next chapter, she talks about working the altar, and how it's supposed to be like a space of work. I appreciated that because, again, I have a tendency to go toward like the purely mental space. And one thing I really loved is she talks about interacting with your ancestors in terms of love languages. If anyone has ever learned these love languages, they're meant as a way of interacting with your living, you know, relatives or family members, and they are quality time, affirmations, acts of service, physical touch, and gifts. And she says that, like, except for physical touch, which is like taboo, you're not really supposed to touch dead people. She explains that like all of these you could do with your ancestors, and if you think about it, like spending quality time with them, affirming them, telling them like, oh, thank you for giving me, you know, expressing gratitude if they are able to get you something, acts of service, giving them offerings, and gifts. I think those overlap a little bit, but if you make them a cookie or something, you've made them, that's an act of service, and then giving them the thing is a gift. So yeah, there are definitely ways in which you can interact with your ancestors just like you'd interact with living people. So that kind of demystifies it a little bit, I think. I also really like what she says about prayer in this chapter. She says that it's a spell is a prayer in 3D. And she discusses how you can give different kinds of offerings for different things to your ancestors. So, for instance, she says, like, if you really want them to work for you, you can give them coffee. And if they do something really nice and you want them to, like, feel like they can rest, you can give them wine or something like that. So I thought that was really interesting. I had never thought about that. This idea of, like, giving them a message through the offering, sort of. And she gives a lot of other really great suggestions for offerings. I just wanted to hit like some of my real favorites. She also discusses how to give offerings, and how often and why. And I really appreciate that because I think maybe this is just me, but I tend to get really confused about the differences, like the sort of different steps of a working, like, I think I mentioned this in my Wicca review, the book Wicca by A Modern Practitioner's Guide by Erin Murphy Hiscock. I think I mentioned this in that book review where I talked about how I often get confused between like, okay, we're going to begin the ritual, and now we're going to consecrate something, and now we're going to, like, there's just so many steps, and some of them to me seem to overlap sometimes. But she talks about how you can, for instance, give an offering while praying for your ancestors' blessing. So you're giving them an offering and you're praying sort of at the same time. And I think for me, it kind of helps that she doesn't divide these into too many different categories. Because I think they're not these strict different categories that you really have to observe. It seems like it's just a little bit more fluid. And, you know, if it's okay to just kind of merge the category of giving an offering and praying. And even to merge those things with spells, like those could be part of spells too. So yeah. And she has a chapter about praying to and for the ancestors. And And she says that prayer is in some ways indistinguishable from mediumship. And the fact that she talks about mediumship in this book is one of the reasons that it's one of my favorite books, because maybe it's just that I'm sort of new at this, but I don't know that many books that talk directly about mediumship. And if you do know any books that talk about it, it's a subject I'm very, very interested in. So I would super appreciate any recommendations as well. But yeah, I liked that idea that prayer is a form of mediumship, that like you can pick up messages from your ancestors through prayer. And she also makes the point that your ancestors have agency. They, they have desires, they have wants for you, and they can say things. Like, they can say things that maybe don't sound like you, that don't sound like your own voice, and things that maybe you wouldn't even agree with sometimes. So, like, I like that idea too, that they have agency, and I think it helps me to think about it not just as a one-way street, but as a two-way street. I really like all the different things she says about prayer as well. She talks about how repetitive prayer can be trance-inducing, which I thought was fascinating. She talks about singing as, like you can sing a prayer. And again, as a Protestant, I think maybe this is something I'd be more familiar with if I was Catholic. But we don't really sing prayers, and like, I say we, I'm not part of it anymore, but, as a kid, I never really sang prayers. So I think that's fascinating. It's pretty foreign to me. And then she talks about different kinds of prayer and times for prayer. She talks about novenas, which are 9-day prayers. I wasn't familiar with that before. She talks about praying for a whole month for something. And then she has a chapter on spiritual hygiene, which is kind of mostly what it sounds like. But one thing I really appreciated about this chapter is that this is the chapter where she goes more into house spirits. And she talks about how she recognizes a spirit of the faucet and a spirit of the stove, which I love that. I really like the idea that there are these spirits in your house that are associated with fire and water, and that kind of rule fire and water in your house. And that she says that she doesn't give offerings to them because she finds that they don't really take offerings. And her reasoning for that is that maybe they're so powerful that they don't need offerings. So I thought that was interesting. I've ever since she said that, I've started to, in the morning when I make my oatmeal, because I usually eat oatmeal, I've been saying, Spirit of the faucet, thanks, and Spirit of the stove, thanks. Just a simple, like, thank you. So I found that very meaningful, because it, like, connects me to my body and connects me to my home and these, like, physical practices that I'm doing. And especially these days when most of us are, a lot of us are in our homes. I mean, we're lucky if we're able to be mostly in our homes because of the virus. But yeah, in a time when a lot of us are spending a lot more time at home, it is really nice to recognize the spirits of your home, I think. And chapter 7 and 8 are about mediumship. So she talks a lot about what mediumship is and really demystifies the concept, because I had never really known much about it, except for I studied Victorian literature, and so I definitely knew about spiritualism in the 19th century, and I know that that still goes on in Lilydale, in New York, because I'm in New York City, so that's not that far away from here. Never been there, but at any rate, I didn't know a whole lot about modern mediumship, and she really demystifies it a lot. So, let's see what I wanted to say about it. Again, she talks here about like how your ancestors have agency and how it's like a two-way street, and how they can share messages with you. And that's really the basic component of mediumship, is that they may share messages with you. And she goes through how there's different ways you can know those. Basically, some of those are what we think of as the clairs, clairsentience, clairaudience. all of those, and just knowing things. Or sometimes it's like senses that are not quite one of the five senses, like feeling someone near you or something like that. I personally have had that experience of feeling my grandmother right behind me. I've had that experience before, so this really resonates with me, even though I didn't know about it before. I appreciated that she mentioned that secular people experience ancestral pressure too. She talks about how when her wedding, I believe it was her wedding that was being planned, her folks were really stressed, and how they were stressed because, there's all this messaging, not just from capitalism, but from one's ancestors. There's a pressure from well behind you in your family tree to do specific things, on this important date. And I thought that was really interesting. She also talks about ways of integrating the messages that you get from your ancestors. One of those is making art out of it. So she basically says that, like, unless you're fully integrating the message that they give you, you're not, like, truly understanding it, and you may be, like, losing out on it, kind of. You have to, like, really integrate it into your life. And one way that she says to do that is, again, through art, maybe journaling about it, basically just, like, making it really concrete somehow. Again, like, putting it into the world. And something I really loved is that she emphasizes that you don't have to, like, stress about this. So I am definitely the person who would question whether the message I got was really from my ancestors. I would question if I really got the message. I would question everything about it. Again, OCD brain. But I know that's probably something a lot of people share. And she stresses that if the message is really important, you will get it. And if the message is really, really important, you will get it multiple times, probably in multiple different ways. And I really like that. I think it takes some of the pressure off. It makes you, and it just makes you live more in the present and like want to watch out for those things rather than putting pressure on yourself. And again, with that like animistic worldview, these things will come to you, because the world is kind of like alive. If you believe that, then you probably believe that the messages will get to you somehow. And I believe that. I think that really resonated with me. She has a chapter about herbal allies. I loved that. I read it, in depth, even though there was a lot of information there. It's like really rich in information. Just one of the tidbits that I loved. So as a devotee of Persephone, I liked that she mentioned this myth that I had never known, which is that Persephone turned Hades' lover Minthe into a plant, which is where we get the name mint. So little tidbits like that. She has a lot of like lore about the plants in addition to their uses. And then she talks about how to actually call on ancestral power in chapter 10. So she talks about what it means to really use your ancestors, or not use them, but work with them as allies in your spellcraft and stuff like that. And she talks about how the voice that says that we can't have what we want may come from ancestral trauma. And that we need to, when we're doing spells, really think about what we actually want. And she doesn't say this in a cautionary way, like a be careful what you wish for kind of way. I often find that a little frustrating, because that can lead you to never wish for anything, or never like want anything, or never even exert effort toward anything. If you're always second guessing yourself. But she says it more in a way of like, you can have what you want. And if you proceed from that belief, it is possible, probably. If you proceed from that belief, then it is easier to figure out what you actually do want. and then it's easier to go after it, and what you get will be more to your liking and more what is actually probably good for you. Yeah, and in this chapter, I also really love that she thinks about how your ancestors could actually help you in spellcraft beyond just adding power, adding their power to your power or to whatever power you're drawing on. Excuse me. She talks about how your ancestors could actually potentially teach you how to do things, how to do different techniques. And I think that could be literal, like through a dream. She gives an example of a lady who had this crazy thing that her ancestor told her to do in a dream to lift a family curse, that the lady never would have like expected or been able to figure out on her own. And also she makes the point that like your ancestors go back really far, so you could have some like actual druid ancestors for all you know. There could be ancestors back there who know magic that we don't even know today, and they could tell you something about it or tell you how to do it. And again, that could be really literal. I think it could also be more metaphorical, like, like she talks about how she got into, I believe it's Tarantismo, which is a dance tradition from Italy that she sort of just stumbles upon a flyer. So I think also it can be this sort of trail of cosmic breadcrumbs kind of thing where you're stumbling upon the information that you need through the aid of your ancestors. But yeah, it can also have that really literal component, which is super exciting to me. Like, I want to be taught how to do a cool piece of magic by my ancestors. Who doesn't want that? And then, let's see, anything else I wanted to mention? Oh, yes. Her last chapter deals with spells, and I love her spells. I love the way she writes spells. They're so unique. Each one was very unique. Some of the ones she has a spell for self-love, a spell for a woman to rule in the home, which works with Saint Martha. So again, I love Saint Martha, so I love that spell. A spell to inoculate yourself against despair, a spell to learn who your real friends are, and a spell to move to a new town or city. And again, they're all very unique, but just to give one example, the spell to move to a new town or city is like, start doing all the touristy things that you've never done before. And that's like a big part of the spell. And as a person who's about to move, actually, I'm about to move to Long Island, that really resonated because it's like, I think a lot of her spells really had to do with ritual, with ritualizing something that's happening in your life. And I definitely have found as I'm about to move that this ritualizing of like having all the food that I love here and trying new food in the new place in Port Washington, like those things are really, really meaningful for me. And then the last thing that she says in the book is, remember that it is so good to be alive. And I just love that. I think that's like one of the prayers that she mentions, saying to your ancestors is just thanking them for the body that you have and for the life that you have. Because no matter what they did or didn't do in the past, they got you here. They did that for you. And that in itself is valuable. So yeah, I really liked that. Just remembering how good it is to be alive and to be in the driver's seat of the car, which is the metaphor she uses for us having like the final say-so in our lives. So yeah, it was a great book. I would recommend it for anybody who's interested in ancestor veneration. And just again, she mentions that she is, initiated in multiple traditions in Kimbanda, and she's also an Orisha, a venerator of the Orishas. And a Catholic. Again, she grew up Catholic. So she mentions that she is in these multiple traditions, but that nothing she says is actually like based in a like. It's not like it's so specific that you couldn't use it. I think it's good for anyone. But she also says, like, if you are in a tradition, maybe you want to, like, you should probably ask, your godparents or your teachers or mentors or whomever before you use the book. So I like that she acknowledges that like traditions may have their own way of doing things that come before the advice that she gives, but also that she gives tools that everyone can use regardless of tradition. So yeah, I think it has like really wide applicability, and I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I do, and as much as I did. And I hope you'll let me know if you read it, and I hope you'll let me know anything you want to let me know about your ancestor practice. I think it would be really cool to get a good conversation going about that. Yeah, I also wanted to show, I got these earrings from my sister for her Christmas. So she's like, these look like you. And I'm like, at first I was kind of like, I don't know, do they? And then I put them on and I'm like, oh, these are actually really cute. So maybe she knows me better than I know myself. Anyway, see you guys next time. Bye.